What's up, guys? Welcome back to Watchtime. Today on the podcast, we have Ian Borthwick, also known as Ian from SeatGeek. He is the man that has made many of the biggest influencer marketing campaigns happen. He's gotten David Dobrik to the World Series. He's paid for college kids' tuition. He's made, I think, over 13 cars available for David's video. Elliot and I have spoken about the collaborations, many of which he's facilitated, and we think they're some of the best that are happening in the industry at the moment. So I'm thrilled to have him on the podcast today. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel or followed us on Spotify and Apple, make sure you do that and leave us a review. And without further ado, let's get into the podcast. Welcome, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us on Watchtime today.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I think we're going to kick off to it. Obviously, I feel like a lot of people learnt your name in a way that a lot of people don't usually learn the name of someone that's coordinating big brand deals for an influencer through your relationship with David and the work that you were doing with him. So I think to kick off, we'd just be really interested to know sort of how that relationship developed and started and how it sort of blossomed into such a long-term relationship with him.
Yeah, it's definitely like how I became known to the world. I wouldn't say it was definitely intentional by any means, but David has a knack for inserting everyone in his life into his vlogs and making a character out of it. So I wanted to work with David for years, and he never returned my emails. Let's just say his agent always returned my emails. He didn't respond to them. So we would never get feedback on, we always wanted to do a deal with him. We kept on emailing him and he just kept on blowing us off. And then right before the 2016 World Series, we got an email back from Jack Reed, who is his manager, and he said, David wants to go to the World Series. And so that was like, I remember I was sitting in our office and I got tingly, but I also got nervous because I don't know, I'm a loser, but anytime you're kind of trying to work with a big creator or even just any creator and you really wanted to do something and now it's real, suddenly you're like, oh shit, now I actually have to make it happen. So anyway, we get on I emailed David and Jack and I'm like, we want to send you the World Series, and he's like, let's do it. Send over the talking points. I sent over these talking points, and you guys probably know these talking points where it's we had probably 8 or 10 bullets, a lot of screen sharing of the app. It was very onerous. It was the worst. It was we want you to sell your soul for SeatGeek and I'll give you these World Series tickets.
Yeah.
And that's how we had done it to date. And David immediately was like, nope, not doing that. And then he called me and he said he's not going to do it. But he wanted us to make it about him. He's like, listen, I'll build it up as this moment is only possible because SeatGeek is helping me make it possible.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the thing that I was kind of nervous. I was like, well, what about the app? What about how great our deal score is? What about how awesome our app looks? And in a nice way, he was like, I don't think people aren't going to care about that. They're going to care that you're buying my best friend tickets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is ultimately
so that was
why people like SeatGeek so much.
Yeah. I think and that, if you take a step back, that's I think how a lot of brands don't understand that when you partner with these creators, you're partnering with them and their audience.
Yeah.
And the power is when you lean into that connection. So you become part of that relationship. And the minute you start telling a creator, you got to hit these 10 bullets, you need to speak in this way that's not authentic to their audience, everybody just immediately is skipping, tuning out, not caring. And so that's kind of what we learned then. And so that was the start of David and I's relationship. And since then, we partnered on over 30 videos, 250 million views. It's been a pretty crazy relationship to the point where he's called me and recorded our negotiation for the brand deal. that's in the video.
Okay,
That's
okay.
amazing.
Weird.
That was actually going to be my next question, because like, you watch a David Dobrik video and he'll be like, "Oh, I want to do something crazy," and then you like see him pick up a phone and be like, "Yo, like Ian, I need a Ferrari. I can get okay, cool, thank you," and then hangs up the phone. Like, I know, and Grace knows, and like most people probably have a general sense that when it comes to getting approval from a company to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is what like an integration on a David Dobrik video is worth, like normally that takes a little bit of like finesse around whether or not that's talking about kind of what exactly the deliverables are, even though I understand with you guys, you've obviously got that down to a T at this point, so it doesn't matter. Or, so basically on my end, I'm just so curious, is it as like casual and random as basically SeatGeek being like, this guy works, it's just give him whatever, just do it, just do whatever he wants? Or is it like you have a set amount per month you can do with David? Or is it just, I'm just so curious, like how actually, like, do you have to have a structure in how you work with him, or have you been given like autonomy, or
What doesn't the audience see?
I mean, the audience sees a lot. Like with the Ferrari video, I knew David wanted to do something big for some time, and so like a lot of my job is like almost getting ahead of things and being like, this is how much money, well, this is my budget for every month, and then trying to set aside kind of what I call like the like, oh shit, we're just gonna go for it budget, where it's like
The David
I have
budget.
enough. The David budget, or we partnered with like Cody Ko and Noel when we did their music video. Like the budget
That was
like,
amazing.
We just let's do cool shit budget, but that make it actually make money for SeatGeek. And so the Ferrari video, I didn't plan it. David called me. I knew it was going to work, and we had proved enough success with David because everything we do as a code. And if you go into influencer marketing, like to actually drive transactions or business results, you start to have what something's worth. And I knew how valuable that video would be worth. Now, I didn't have the money at the time, so I said yes to David, and I had to go call my boss and call people and make sure it happened. So it was a little dicey for a second, but also like you don't get those amazing moments if you don't like take a chance. And so I knew I could get the money ultimately.
That's so interesting, because I think I think ultimately we, like if we've ever on the click side like had like a deal of that size go through, a lot of the time there's literally like weeks of back and forward, and there's like strict video approval, and a lot of the time there's like negotiation going. There's definitely not just a phone call that says I want a Ferrari, get me one, and then that kind of budget comes through. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the way I position SeatGeek is there are a lot of brands that pay David Dobrik and creators more than we do on a per video basis, but we want to be the easiest people to work with. Like we know exactly what we want, but we want to make your video cool.
Yeah.
We're not going to have 3 approvals. We're going to have 1 approval, and I will get it back to you within 10 to 15 minutes. Like that's my goal. I get a video, I have to have it back that fast. And so that's kind of how we position ourselves. And with David, I think David would tell you that every time he tells us we're getting too good of a deal. And my pushback always to David is, but we're not going to have 3 rounds of edits. If you want to get a vlog, if you want to call me on a Friday, you can have the vlog out by Saturday.
Yeah.
And not many brands can do that.
I think that's, and
very few.
I also reckon that's just like the smartest way to actually work as a brand. Because if you develop this like reputation for just being frustrating to work with and harder to work with than you need to be, then people obviously want to do it less. They're going to expect more budget, and and ultimately all you're doing is you're increasing your marketing costs by a ridiculous amount. Whereas if you can just kind of just take some of the edge off, like, because I feel like a lot of companies, when they do marketing, they're used to doing it through, obviously it's becoming a bit more like, we've been around for a bit longer now, but influencer marketing in the scheme of things is still relatively new. So you have a lot of these like marketing companies who have their marketing execs who've been doing advertising for 50 years, and they're used to getting the really structured, like, I buy this TV ad slot and it goes on this thing here, and that is exactly what it's going to be, and they understand it. So as soon as you're asking them to kind of like lessen the controls a bit and kind of and like let go, it's terrifying. So I see a lot of brands that just shoot themselves in the foot because they're not willing to do that. Influencers don't want to work with them. They charge them more, and ultimately their costs go up way more.
Yeah.
I mean, for like David or for Kodiko and Noel for that video, like they called us because they're like, we want to have a deal fast, easy, and lets us bring our creative vision to life. So David wants to give away a car. We will be quick enough, and we won't make him like put SeatGeek all over the outside of it. So I think that's just how you have to position yourselves.
Yeah. And I guess with all that said, it's still easier said than done, I think, probably for you to convince your bosses or for SeatGeek to get behind the fact that, okay, we're going to totally relax these talking points, and maybe no one knows about the app, or maybe no one knows the stats on like how successful ticket purchasing is or whatever, but everyone is going to have a great feeling about the company after like a David video. How hard was that to get across the line? Because I mean, you said yourself like that wasn't something where the relationship started organically and you were like, hey David, like do whatever you want. There was an element where he was convincing you guys. How did that go for you?
I mean, for us, we've always been a brand that has worked well with creators. So we were one of the first podcast sponsors. So whether it was, we were the first person to sponsor the Bill Simmons podcast, which is a massive sports podcast in the US. And since then, we've always had this creator tilt where we believe SeatGeek can separate itself as a brand through creators. So Ticketmaster, StubHub are the two big brands out here. And those companies, they're going to spend a ton of money on TV. They're going to spend a ton of money on radio. But what they're not going to do is get in the DMs of a creator and try to work out a deal. And so we always viewed that as our competitive advantage. And since then, we've kind of always been building on it. So when we got to David, I had 4 years of business results to show, listen, this is how many transactions it drives back to SeatGeek. And I built up that much equity within the company that when I told my bosses we were buying David a car, they thought it was kind of weird. Like they did, and I did too. But then when you can point to, listen, this is how much results David's driving for the company. I mean, David and SeatGeek is more searched than like Ninja Red Bull, Steph Curry, Under Armour. Like those two keywords together are one of the most searched like influencer partnerships out there. And you can only do that if you truly lean into what the creator is building.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, I feel like so many brands, as you said, Elliot, shoot themselves in the foot because they're like, we want to do influencer marketing or we want to work with YouTubers or creators. And then they give them a laundry list of all the talking points they have to hit. And it's like, oh, you're like ruining the magic of what you're going to get by working with creators in the first place.
Yeah, like weird example, but and a lot of the time hitting those talking points, and brands just don't understand this sometimes. I'm like you're actually hurting yourself here. Like this message is becoming less impactful because of what you're hitting me with here. Like I did a it was sponsored for, I won't say what, but it was like a screen or a computer. It was a hardware product. And the brand hit me with this like brief, and it was like, talk about the layman exo tracing elements of the water cooled hypochondria, low key tracer mate. And I was like, can I just say like, it's a dope monitor with a sick refresh rate, great frames, and love it for gaming? And they're like, no. We need to talk about the newly developed ultra color luminescence. And I'm like, I don't understand what this is. I'm a gamer who's played more than most of my audience. My audience definitely doesn't understand what this is. All that this sounds like is that I'm throwing marketing mumbo jumbo in their face that ruins the authenticity of the message. And what makes influencer marketing so damn effective and so special, and what makes it better in, I think, my opinion and probably all our opinions, than TV marketing, is that it's genuine. It's coming from someone who most of the time is speaking pretty genuinely about what they're talking about. And as soon as you shove like really weird talking points and you don't let them put it in a way that their audience relates to, God, it just kills that. It kills all that authenticity. And it's like, why even do it? Just go buy a TV ad. Just if that's what you want, just do that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Passion point.
No, it gets me worked up. It's to me, I'd even go a step further, even though maybe this is mean. I think it's like arrogant almost. I think maybe it's not naive, but you're to say that you're going to know how to speak to an audience better than the creator is basically like, what are we doing this in the first place?
Yeah.
Like
100%.
You're buying someone who can speak to that audience in a certain language, in a certain way that they're going to make sense. Like what you just said, your audience hears that and they're like, yeah, I want that dope ass computer. They don't care about whatever is in the brains, but on the back end, there's all these marketers. There's probably 4 people in a room with a Google Doc who are each adding their favorite like feature of this computer into this doc. And so what I do is I literally will stand in front of like, I'll pretend I'm recording and I will try to do the read myself. And if I can't get through the read myself in a natural way, then I can't send it. So I think I really put a lot of like, you have to actually try to do it yourself if you're going to ask an influencer to do it.
Yeah.
The amount of briefs I've had to send back where I'm just like, this doesn't fit. Like, you want 30 seconds? I'm like, this is like 75 seconds worth of
They're my favorite. They're my favorite. They'll be like, oh, can we do a 15-second integration? You're like, yeah, sure. They're like, okay, these are the mandatory talking points. And it's like an essay. And you're like, come on, bro. Come on. That's not how this works.
I mean, that's just cheating.
Yeah, I know. It's so cheating.
I know. They're just like, well, we'll get 45 seconds. The problem is what they don't realize is, let's say you do the 15, and now you're going to pick which bullet you like the most. And that's probably maybe not the bullet they like the most.
Yeah.
And so then they're like, that's the problem. That's why I only send 3 bullets, because any creator can understand 3 bullets. But once you go past 3 bullets, you're in a dicey
it's a
area.
bit much. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's
Okay.
super interesting what you said about letting the creator put it in a way their audience will engage with. And I think what makes that interesting with like, SeatGeek and like David Dobrik, like as a podcast, is that as like a content creator, is like his content is all about friends and friend groups and people. So like it's so smart the way that like he's like made you a part of that content and a face of SeatGeek, because that way he's no longer he's kind of making SeatGeek not just like a faceless brand. He's kind of putting you as like the face behind it. Like there is a person there who is like fun to talk with, who will enable crazy stuff to happen. And it's almost like, you're either like there are the friends who are like going on and like doing all the like crazy trips, but then also SeatGeek becomes a part of that, because it's not just like, hey, this video is sponsored by SeatGeek. It's like this whole crazy thing we're about to do is enabled by them being there. So it kind of like really makes you, it makes you and it makes the brand almost like part of the friend group, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that was David's pitch pretty early on, was, if you trust me, well, I'll make you a character in the videos. Because if in his eyes, he doesn't want to bring a new brand in every video and kind of lose that moment. But what his pitch was, when they hear the word SeatGeek, something amazing is going to happen, and just trust me. And I've trusted him, and so far it's been great. But you really need to lean into that friend group. And now I think we got 25,000 tweets of people who just tag us and do the ad. Like the ad read has become a meme in itself, where we get all these TikToks and tweets about people like doing the ad read and like on after their wisdom teeth gets taken out, or in just like weird. Somebody did it at their wedding. It was their wedding toast, which is I feel kind of bad for that family, but
That's like sometimes I've had a few people like tweeting like that they got like a tattoo of like code Muselk on their arm, and I'm like, oh my god, I like, that's amazing, like I love you, but also God, I really hope that in 30 years you're not there, just like, oh damn, I really wish I never watched that guy. It's a lot of pressure.
But I think you touch on something really good there, which is a question I wanted to ask. And I think this is something that Elliot and I have spoken a lot about on the podcast before, where it's like the brands and the creators that are doing branded partnerships really well are the ones that have pivoted from, I think in the past, creators used to want to hide that the video was sponsored, and they'd be like, oh, this amazing monitor is so great, and like would kind of hide the fact that it was sponsored, or they'd try and read it really quickly and get it over and done with as soon as possible because it wasn't ever a positive thing. And I think something that you guys have done, which is so unique, is that you've actually made sponsorships something that is something you can be proud of to the audience. But I think the question that I had is, I guess initially, what first attracted you to David before you'd worked with him in the first place? Why did you want him over anyone else? And what do you think has made the partnership so successful?
Yeah, I mean, before David, we had probably worked with 200 creators, and David to me was just one of those, I use the term like great white buffalo. He was just him, Casey Neistat. There were just these couple iconic creators at the time that I always said, if we could work with those people, we've made it as a brand.
Yeah.
And so that was, and those people are just, they don't do brand deals easily. They have this cult-like following around them. So when we partner with a creator, you're really trying to find that community. And the thing about, I remember seeing David tweeted something, and it was just like, no offense to David, it was like the stupidest shit I'd ever seen. It was like and you see it with these TikTok stars right now. And they tweet something that makes no sense. But then you look at it in 1 minute and it has like 10,000 retweets and 40,000 comments. And you're just like, what's going on here? There's something that I don't get.
That's definitely how I feel with a lot of TikTok. I'm like, I don't get this at all.
Like Addison Rae tweeted something about like, my skin's so great. Or no, it was like, what colors should I paint my nails? Black or like red? And I looked at it, and 2 minutes later, it was just, the engagement was just insane.
Yeah.
And so now I have some thoughts about like TikTok and where that's going to go. But for David, I just knew, and Casey and a couple other creators, I just knew they had a cult around them. And that was what we want to tap into. Because if you have that, and you guys see this with your creators, like when you have that following, the ad read just goes that much further. You're not just buying views, you're buying, like, I wouldn't want to say into a cult because that sounds more messed up than it is, but you're buying into like a community, and you can kind of become an inside joke to that community, and that's where you see just like incredible results.
Yeah. I think as soon as you know you're being memed by by like a creator's audience, that's like, you've made it. That's amazing.
Yeah, and and before you do a deal, if a creator and his audience have inside jokes, you know there's something there, because like to have an inside joke with someone, you have to have this weird connection that you get if you're close. And so like anytime a YouTuber and their audience have these inside jokes and you can see them in the comments, you're like, okay, they've created their own like world.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to tap into.
Do you have any other creators that you look at the moment that you think are really doing that?
I'm a big fan of this guy, MMG. He's a Madden gamer. I think he's like one of the best up and coming sports gamers out there. I'm also really close with this guy, Pat McAfee, who is I think it's really interesting to see these. He's a former professional athlete who decided to quit football, turn down, I don't know, like $14 million to a comedy career. And now he's the #1 sports YouTuber in the US. And so he's just getting crazy views. And he kind of went the opposite way, where he was like on ESPN, playing football. And now he's going into this YouTube life. And so I think it's really interesting that people, because there's not very many people who can, move from traditional entertainment to YouTube. That's a really hard jump to make.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really interesting now as well that, people were always doing social media and thinking, how can I get onto traditional media from this? Like, how can I go from YouTube to a TV show? And now I feel like it's come 360, or 180, and people are wanting the opposite. And you're seeing like traditional people thinking, how can I get into social media? How can I start a YouTube channel? I just think that's super interesting. Like the goal is no longer necessarily getting to TV or movies. It's like, how can I expand what I'm doing with the platform that I have here?
Totally. I mean, what they don't have and what you guys have is a direct connection to an audience. And if you have that direct connection, you're not at the whims of some network decides, okay, we don't want to do your show anymore. And then what? Mm-hmm. And so you're in a much more powerful position if you own your audience, if you have built this audience, because they're going to follow you if you move up the food chain. But it's really hard to say, okay, like there's been stars that continue to try to just do YouTube and they just don't do it. It just doesn't work because they didn't have the skill set to do it, because they never had to form a direct relationship with their audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So finishing off the David topic, one question I have is, SeatGeek is obviously a ticketing app and service. A lot of the time, what you guys have become known for with the partnership is giving away cars or things that definitely don't necessarily have to directly do with the actual service or product that SeatGeek is offering. Why do you feel like you're okay with that?
I mean, initially I wasn't. Marketing logic would tell you should always promote the product you actually have. So SeatGeek sells tickets. Why are we buying cars? Why are we paying people's tuition? Why are we in a music video? And the music video was an inside joke about us buying cars. But I think audiences are much more sophisticated than we give them credit for, where David and we've built enough equity in the influencer space, in the YouTube space, where people know SeatGeek is a ticket company, but because we're not promoting ticketing, suddenly like the audience likes us more. They feel like we get it. They feel like David builds it and other creators build it. Hey, they let me do this amazing thing for my audience. And everyone knows the word SeatGeek is an amazing ticket app. And that becomes even more ironic when the video has nothing to do with ticketing, if you do it right. It's not easy, and it's a very difficult thread for me to like manage, not going too far and just no one knows what we are. But at the same point, we're not going to pigeonhole the content that it has to always just promote ticketing, because ultimately the audience is smart. They Google SeatGeek. The read includes ticketing, and people get it at the end of the day. And it almost sticks out more in their head because people call us a car dealership, even though we're a ticketing company.
Yeah.
And to even make that joke, you have to understand that we're a ticketing company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point. Yeah. Okay. I have one final question before we move off the David topic and onto more general stuff. Has there ever been something that he's wanted to do where we've just been like, no, David, no, we're not doing that. Go home. You're drunk. Although David doesn't really drink, so he probably wouldn't be drunk. But like, has there ever been something where he's like pitched it and you've been like, actually, the Ferrari was fine. No, we can't do this one.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember the Instagram sweepstakes we did with him over, was it New Year's? No, it was over Christmas. So we gave away, so David calls me and he says, for Christmas, I want to give away a Tesla. And I want to do it on Instagram. I want to make a sweepstakes. And I hate sweepstakes. I hate everything about them. I think they're usually cheap. They're gimmicky, for a brand at least. And you just get a bunch of people who want to download your app and never buy, because they just want to enter into sweepstakes. They don't actually want to make a purchase.
Yeah.
And the last thing is you have to write up so many legal rules to make it work. And it's kind of just a pain in the ass. But David would not stop annoying me about it. Like, he just kept on calling me every day, multiple times a day, being like, I really want to do this. 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 And I was like, dude, I just don't want to do it. How do we make money off this? And so eventually we got to the place where David just beat me down on the sweepstakes, that he was so passionate about it that I just felt like I had to trust him, and just do it, which sounds crazy to agree to that. But we basically did a package deal where we did he got a sweepstakes, I got a video, and we paid a little bit more than we wanted to because David wanted to do the sweepstakes too. And it ended up working. I mean, we did, he drove 2.3 million new followers to our Instagram within 24 hours. And it was the number 10 trending topic on Twitter. So again, sometimes marketers overthink things sometimes, and sometimes you just have to let a creator do what they're going to do, especially if you have a successful relationship.
He drove 2.3
Okay, so that was an
million.
Example.
I was like, you said yes in that one, but but it
You
was
said
a
no, but
slower
then you
yes
agreed to
than
it
normal.
anyway.
Oh, yeah, I guess I ended up saying yes.
So, long story short, never said no to David. Good to know.
I'll
But
say
wait.
no until he calls me multiple times a day and wears me down, and I have to say yes.
So the thing is, David loves negotiating, and so I enjoy it too. So there's like a lot of, like, we had this call recently where he was like, we both hadn't given our number for what we think something's worth. And he said, you go first. And I said, if I go first, I'm going to say a number way lower than what you're going to do. And he's like, well, then I'm just going to say a number way higher than what I'm going to say. And then we eventually, like, on FaceTime, agreed to basically say our numbers at the same time. To the point where we could get to a point where he would actually, we could cut to the chase. And so David just was like, this is the lowest number I'll accept. I'm not going to negotiate with you. And so that's kind of how we've gotten it.
I love
For
how
those
much.
listening in at home, this is not how negotiations normally happen.
But I love how much this literally sounds like a high school relationship where it'd be like, you say I love you. No, you say it first. All right, we say it together. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. And then also being like, loving negotiating, like, like playing like hard to get, but like brand deal version where it's like, oh, I don't even really want to do the brand deal, David. Like, it's like, well, I don't really.
Oh, that is, it's all that stuff. I mean, one of the ones we were doing, David had to take off on a flight, and he's like, all right, we're going to negotiate, but once the flight gets in the air, we have to have the deal done or it's never going to happen. So we had this like shot clock of like him sitting in his seat texting me and us going back and forth on pricing.
5
And
minutes
like
till takeoff.
Oh,
and
but
I'm like
taxiing.
sweating at my desk. And I'm like, I'm sweating because I wanted to get it done. And David's like, it was just, anytime he like loves those moments and loves negotiating himself. So it can be really stressful, but that's how we developed a relationship.
Did you get it done?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We
He's
got
like,
it done.
ooh,
I mean,
we're
the thing is-
taxiing onto the runway.
Literally, like, it was like all caps. He's like, I'm about to lose service. Yes or no. This whole conversation makes me feel like I'm the loser in all these conversations because I always say yes, but I just have to beat him down off his price because David will say some ridiculous price, and you have to just play hard to get for a little while.
Okay, so like my only question, sorry, I know we keep saying we're going to move on from this topic, but I just find this dynamic so interesting because it's so unique for any brand. Surely at this stage, like David gets pretty consistent viewership. The integration is always pretty much the same. It's, hey, SeatGeek gave me money to do something dumb, and it's always the same spiel. Like you said, like people can literally reel off what the spiel is because it's always identical.
Yeah.
Are you guys not just at a stage now where it's like, okay, I'm going to do an integration and it is going to be the same amount that it always is because it's the same integration on the same video that's going to deliver roughly the same views?
I mean, the way we usually structure it, and we like to do this with a lot of our creators, is a 6-month to a year-long deal where they have a set video every month that they're doing for us. And then with David or any other creator, if we think there's an amazing opportunity to jump on that's outside of that current partnership, we'll jump on that too.
Right.
So Dave, like, we always start with a normal deal with David, and then David, oh, but I need to buy my assistant her third car. And then I'm like, does she really need another car?
Is
And
she
he's
really
like,
your
"Yeah, I
assistant
think-"
at this stage?
Yeah. And then next thing you know, we're doing another deal that's kind of like an up level on it or whatever. And because we positioned ourselves as the brand that can help make, and our goal is to really have creators call us when they want to do something that has a really short turnaround. They need a set amount of money and they want creative freedom. And because of that, they're not going to charge us an arm and a leg because they want to make this, like for Codico Noel, they wanted us to underwrite the cost of the music video. The music video costs a certain amount of money. And in a dream world, they're not paying for their music video. And in a dream world, we're part of a music video. So it's trying to be that brand that creators are going to call on.
Yeah.
Because then you get good deals.
Who are you going to call? SeatGeek.
Okay, so something that you touched on earlier was the fact that when you're thinking about how you're going to do a deal with someone, you're thinking about how is this ultimately going to lead to a return for SeatGeek, or how is SeatGeek going to make money from this, which makes sense. But obviously at the level of partnerships that you're doing, and you're doing repeat partnerships with the same people a lot of time, how important, like how are you measuring ROI, or how are you measuring the return that you're getting from the spend that you're putting into creators? Is it always how many tickets are being sold, or are there other things that you're valuing?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, we're always going to be, they wouldn't let me pay David and buy these cars or do these deals with creators if I couldn't say, this is how many sales are coming back to SeatGeek. So our like core KPI or core goal is new purchasers to SeatGeek. Mm-hmm. So every time David says, use code David for $20 off your first order, I have a dashboard that I wake up every morning to that says how many new purchasers came in from that code. And I look at that across all of our creators. So that's our core goal, but that's like the most narrow way to view influencer marketing, just for transactions. So it's great if you can validate it just on that alone, but then you layer in social chatter, how many times people search for David and SeatGeek, and then we also see how many people, when they purchase, they fill out a survey, and a ton of people forget to use the code, but then they write in David Dobrik or Tiny Meat Gang or just crazy stuff, and then we go out and match how many people bought without a code. The problem I think some brands make is they go into relationships and they don't know exactly what they want. They don't know what the core goal of that campaign is going to be. And so their read is all over the place. So if your goal is just impressions, it's going to be very tough to prove the ROI long term. You can do some deals, but to get to the scale you need to get at to really own YouTube, you need to come back to transactions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are your thoughts in terms of when you're partnering with people? You said that you've partnered with hundreds of creators, obviously, over the last few years. How do you feel about diversifying and working across multiple creators? There are some brands you see and there'll be a phase and everyone and their mother is sponsored by them. And it's like, okay, they're clearly going for like a huge strategy where they're just going breadth and trying to sponsor as many people as they possibly can. How do you feel about that versus actually forming a relationship with a couple of top creators?
So for us, I'm personally a belief that you need to work directly with the creators you're sponsoring. So there's a lot of software out there that I'm not the biggest fan of, because I think it commoditizes the people on the other end, the creators. So you can put your offer out on these networks and say, I'll pay this much for this many views or this amount of Instagram posts. And what you get is a lot of trash, just a lot of just empty impressions out there.
Yeah.
And I don't view that as a proper way of spending money. So what we do it all in-house. So we have a 4-person team who is forming direct relationships with the people we're working with. And for 2 reasons. One, you negotiate better and you form better relationships with these people. But 2, there's a level of ownership. And you guys made a good earlier point that there is risk here, right? you're partnering with a creator who's speaking on behalf of your brand. And anytime you're adding a bunch of layers in between you and the creator, you don't have that level of ownership you need to really make sure you're partnering with the right people. Because ultimately, if I partner with someone and they do a bunch of bad things or do something terrible in a video, it has to be on me. And that level of responsibility will make me much smarter than if I just, have this hands-off approach and just let other people buy influencer ads on my behalf.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that Elliot and I speak about a lot as well with, for audiences listening at home that might not be familiar, there are a lot of like influencer platforms where a brand can upload a brief and then influencers can basically submit submissions of what they think like their content could look like. And it's, I think, an attempt for a lot of agencies to try and scale their ability to work with creators. But I think rarely would you see, like, I think if people think of the best examples of influencer marketing, I don't think they're coming from these platforms because it's just not possible to have that personal touch with them because it's happening at such scale. I mean, Elliot, I know you and I have had conversations where, like at Click, we really only work with creators that have quite large established audiences already, and they've developed an audience that follows the content. And that means that we're able to have a super hands-on approach with the people that we choose to work with and the brands that we choose to work with. And we try to make sure that all the campaigns people are doing are ones that actually do feel authentic and are therefore going to be a good experience for the talent and for the brand. But yeah, Elliot, I mean, I think you share a lot of the same opinions with Ian there.
Yeah, as well as I think the fact that these days there's so, like, I think more and more, like back in the day, like we were talking about earlier, YouTubers didn't like doing sponsored stuff, or if they did, they felt really weird about it. But these days I feel like integration, sponsored videos, they're just so common. So I feel like a lot of the time these days, channels are viewers will almost like totally tune out from what they're seeing in an integration or a sponsorship if it's not actually done in the right way. If it is a totally like separate, disjointed, hey guys, before we get into the content, I've got a 30-second like spiel that I'm going to pull off, then people, I think, kind of really tune out of it or they skip it or whatever. But I think the way to do it is those ones where you do build those big relationships. And I think what you guys have done with David is like a perfect example of where that literally becomes part of the content in like a really kind of like deep, meaningful way. It literally makes you, like you were saying, a character on the channel, and you don't tune out of it. Like, I think people hear the word SeatGeek in a David video and they're like, something awesome's about to happen. Everyone get ready, like they're keen for it. And I think that's what, I think that's what you're right. Like what makes your guys' way of doing things really stand out and what makes it actually successful.
Yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves is when like a brand and a creator try to, I think they overthink it and they try to like slip an ad in. They're like, oh, and I just happen to love this computer so much that's sitting right next to me in this perfect box.
Sponsored by Asus.
And by the way, it's like it has this amazing new processor in it or whatever. And I think audiences have gotten to the point where you see much less of like sell out, and now it's like get the bag.
Yeah,
and I love it because it's like these creators they're producing this content and they're allowed to do this for a living because they're doing these ad deals. And what you see is a lot more. I think we've come a long way where you see a lot more support for ad deals now. They're like, get the bag, girl, and I'm just like, fuck yeah, That's the mentality you should have. We shouldn't be putting like trashing creators just because they took a brand deal. And I love that. Go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like totally off what you say. I think you're right. Like audiences don't trash creators for doing sponsored stuff anymore. In fact, I think they're pretty, like you say, they're like get the bag. We've got one channel, Fresh, who streams on Twitch, and his audience will literally be like, do an ad break, do it, like show us an ad break right now, like we want to see one, and then it'll finish, and they'll be like, give us another one, like, and then they'll like they're literally begging to see ads. But I do think the one time you do see it backfire is ironically now these days when people don't own the advertisement, when they try and make it seem not sponsored, even though it clearly is sponsored. And I think you saw that in a big way with Casey Neistat and Samsung. I think that he was doing some big Samsung sponsorships, clearly some sponsored content. And I forget what the catalyst was for it, but there was one video or one thing that happened. I think he was maybe filming that advertisement for them. And all of a sudden, his whole audience was just like, this is scummy. You're not disclosing that it's sponsored. You're trying to pretend that it's not, and it's weird. And then since then, he'll literally, like, whenever he does a sponsored thing, like, giant flashing text on screen, like, this video is sponsored by Samsung. Or if it's not, he does the reverse. It's like, to absolutely clarify, I have not been paid anything to do this. You know, like, it's super interesting how that's changed. But I feel like, yeah, ironically these days, the only time where audiences don't like sponsors is when the creator doesn't own the fact. Audiences just don't want to feel misled, basically. I think that's what it comes down to. Audiences want to feel like everything's transparent. That's what they care about. Otherwise, get that bag.
They're too smart. Audiences are way too smart these days. They don't want to feel like the wool's been trying to be pulled over their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you can, I think the best ad deals, the best creators really find a way to, like, bring their audience in on the ad deal, where they're like, listen, guys, they're sponsoring me. They're sponsoring this. They're about the content that I'm producing. And so suddenly your whole audience is behind this brand because they are sponsoring you. It's this weird thing where you get celebrated, the brand gets celebrated because you're sponsoring their favorite creator. And it's less 100%. About the product, and it's more like, listen, you're sponsoring my guy, and therefore I'm on your team because of that. I think
1,000%.
You see that. You see it with SeatGeek. You see it with a couple other really good brands at Influencer, where people just use them. Like in the US, people use Cash App over Venmo because Cash App owns the influencer marketing scene, and Venmo, which is arguably had years and years and years ahead of them, just wasn't there. Wasn't an influencer.
Absolutely. I think like a clear example, Elliot, is the campaign we did with a couple of our creators last year with KFC. And they were nervous. They were like, they hadn't done a huge amount of brand deals before. They were like, oh my gosh, we're going to say we're sponsored by a fast food brand. Like, are people going to hate us? And they announced it, and the comments were just flooded with like, that's so cool. Like, that's so cool that KFC is sponsoring you, or that's cool that like KFC knows who you are. Like that they're like in the gang, like they understand us, and therefore they want to be part of it. Like, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. I mean, a brand that can let their guard down and become part of, like, jump from, I mean, KFC's one of the biggest brands in the world. And when they sponsor a creator, that's just a moment where it feels like, oh my God, this guy I was early on is now having like a moment. We've arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's we've arrived.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've buttered you up. We've been telling you all the good things that you guys do over at SeatGeek and all the successes that you've had. But have you ever had any failures? Have you ever had anything where you were trying something new and you were super nervous about it, or it didn't go to plan? You don't have to give us specifics, but
okay, I'll give you one story that I almost went to the manager. I wanted to go to the manager's house and knock on his door and fight him. That was how mad I was. So now that I've teased it, so back in the early days, we were really hitting our stride on YouTube, and I got the wise idea that I was going to start sponsoring some musicians and rappers. And so I sponsored this big rapper. I DM'd his manager and said, hey, would you like courtside seats to the Warriors were in the finals. I don't remember which game it was. But anyway, it was like 3 or 4 years ago. Courtside seats. It'll be amazing. It'll be awesome. He hits up the unnamed rapper. The unnamed rapper said, yep, I'm down. I'm ready to do it. And I was like, all right, I just need an Instagram post. He's like, okay, cool. And I remember the whole company knew that this rapper was promoting SeatGeek. So it was on our Slack channel. Everyone's watching. Let's call it Game 4. They're all looking at this courtside seat. And I turn the game on, and the seat's empty. And I'm like, all right. this isn't great. I can see it on camera, and then I'm texting the agent, and I'm like, where's so and so? And he's like, I don't know. He's flying back from the Caribbean on a private jet, but he said there'd be no issue. And I'm like, okay, first quarter passes. He's not there. Now I'm getting texts and Slacks from people at work. We're like, hey, what's up? Is it still happening? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's still happening. Mind you, these seats are probably $10,000, $15,000. He walks in the third quarter, sits on the seat, and I'm like, all right, as long as I get my post, I'm golden. Fine. He does the post, and he just completely ignores everything I had in the post and doesn't even tag SeatGeek properly. He spelled it SeatGeek in his caption to like 20 million followers. And I just remember just being so unbelievably mad that like everyone had kind of watched this pretty public failure. I had trusted this person I never should have trusted. And it was definitely one of those kind of like, maybe I got ahead of my skis. I trusted somebody I shouldn't trust. And I just remember being like, I just want to find this rapper. And of course, he'd probably look at me and be like, who the hell are you? Get away from me. But I just remember being so mad about that. That's a failure that really like sticks with you. But we have plenty of deals where we work with the creator, and they do everything we want to, and it just doesn't work. And so
doesn't get the traction.
Those are failures I can live. What?
Doesn't get the traction that you're looking for.
Yeah, but those are failures I can live with. But when someone like breaks my trust, because a lot of this industry is trust. Like I don't, with David or with other people, things move fast, and you have to have trust, especially when you buy people tickets, because I'm prepaying the creator, right? I'm paying you thousands of dollars in tickets before you've done anything for me, even if I have a signed contract. And so that's just, you could theoretically take my tickets, go to the event, and never do a SeatGeek ad.
Yeah.
And that puts me in a really bad spot. So I always have, anytime I go into those relationships since then, I really have to ask myself, do I trust this person's actually going to do what they say they're going to do? Not just did they sign a contract, but do I trust the scenario? Do I trust what's going on and feel comfortable moving forward?
Almost like, do you trust they're gonna give it a good shot as well? That they're not just gonna go through the motions, that they're actually going to do a good job for you. I think that's something.
Yeah,
especially given you guys work in that more casual way. Like there's a lot more implicit trust there. Like the reason most brands are like, no, we're going to do 4 rounds of approvals and we're going to have these strict talking points is because they don't trust people. So yeah, for you guys like go out there and actually do that. Yeah, it's it would suck if that happened.
I think that's something that I feel like I often explain to creators a lot of times. Like they won't understand why like posting on a particular date might be important for the brand, or why getting it up at a particular time might be important. And sometimes there's more flexibility, but I think sometimes creators don't always understand that it's not just about them. Like someone's responsible for allocating that budget, or someone's thinking about how it's going to coordinate with a game release, or I don't know, an out-of-home ad or a TV ad or another event that the creator has nothing to do with, but there's someone, or oftentimes many people at a company that are also working on the back end of that campaign that, they're heavily invested in the outcome of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the big stressful moment for like, you're putting a lot of faith in people, and I think sometimes people always need to remember there's a human on the other end who had to sell someone else that this was a good idea. And we did, when we did Casey and David to Mayweather McGregor in Vegas, David called me and said, hey, I want to go to Mayweather McGregor, and I want 8 seats within the first 15 rows of this event. And so you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It's an incredible amount of tickets, and I need a private jet. And so that was like the ultimate, like, David, don't screw me here, because like we are talking about a lot of money that we are putting down to do a Casey video, a David video, and the rest of the vlog squad. But I'm prepaying this, so I need to trust that you're going to do it exactly how I say you're going to do it. And and David knows. So the funny part was David didn't understand the time zones changed, so they called me, and the fight was starting in 15 minutes, and they were like 30 minutes away because they were in the wrong time zone. They thought they didn't realize what time zone they were in. So I remember I was on vacation calling like car services in Pennsylvania to try to get them from whatever club they were at to the fight. And then I was calling the people who I had the tickets for to meet them at the gate so they could deliver the tickets to Casey and David as they were running in so they wouldn't miss this fight. And so that was like always, that was a very nerve-wracking moment.
Wait, so are you managing those details, like the private jet and the cars and stuff? Like you're not just allocating the budget and then a manager or someone's organizing that?
Yes and no. So the problem
Like that was the last time.
No, I always find myself here for better or worse. So with David and Casey, they were in a situation where they wanted to go to the event. I won't deal with private jets. That's not my world. So I will allocate money for the private jets. I will handle tickets, but I won't deal with that. Now, that said, somehow I always find myself in a situation where a creator is texting me and there's some sort of time dependency, like this event is going to happen. And so I'm the one who, maybe I'm a micromanager, who knows? But I just always find myself texting with the creator and managing it myself, whether it's the posts or the Instagram stories or whatever's going on, because at a certain point, the game of telephone isn't moving fast enough for whatever scenario we've somehow found yourself in. Because basically David gives you like 5 hours to pull together this crazy deal that should take weeks, if not a month of planning. And so in order to get it done, there's so much time dependencies. You end up just texting with them directly to manage the whole process.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, I feel like we're getting to the end, but a last question for me would be best and worst parts about working with creators.
I think the best part is just being able to work with people who are I think it's incredible. I'm very jealous. Not jealous, maybe is the right word. I'm very impressed by creators' like ability to put themselves out there. I think everyone has this naive idea that being a YouTuber or being a content creator is easy and it's not full of all this pressure. And as someone and you all would know better than me, but it's incredibly pressure filled. There's so much passion. To do it right, you have to be so passionate about your craft, and to be able to work with these people who are, take David, you're creating a TV show for 10 to 15 million people by yourself. You're filming it, you're acting in it, you're producing it, you're editing it, and you're distributing it all yourself. And I get to work with those kind of people, the people who are really moving where culture is going. That's awesome. The worst part is you work with these incredibly passionate people who you have to deal with their crazy lives if you want to do it to the degree SeatGeek does it. So that means
a bit more stress.
Yeah, if David calls you at 4 a.m., you're getting up and answering the call at 4 a.m. If somebody needs something from me or anybody on my team, for better or worse, my expectation is you're going to respond to them and get back to them as fast as possible. I came from a talent management background, and that was always how we dealt with athletes. And if an athlete wants something, you kind of drop everything and make it happen. And so that's how my mentality, for better or worse, is that. So that can lead to some stressful situations where you're dealing with things that could go wrong and creators and egos and but that's why it's fun.
Yeah, 100%. Elliot, do you have a last question?
No, that was actually the one that I was going to end on as well. But no, thank you. That was so interesting.
What's the best, the worst thing about working with a brand deal, or the best thing?
Honestly, I think it's pretty much what we chatted about. Like, the worst is when you end up with a brand like that one I described that was like, just, we need to hit these talking points that made no sense in English. Like, there's times where they'll ask you to hit talking points like, it sounds a bit disingenuous. But I think for me, like on the tech side, when people ask you to talk about stuff that you don't know what it means, and you know that your audience doesn't know what it means, and you're just like, why even say this? I may as well just speak to them in like Icelandic, because no one's going to understand what we're talking about. Right. I think they're the frustrating ones. I think it's those moments where sometimes you'll talk to a brand and the brand's like, oh, he's trying to be lazy. He's trying to like get away with doing less. You're like, no, I'm trying to save you from yourself. Like, I know what's going to work for my audience. I want this to be good. I want my audience to like it so that they like me and they like your brand. And I think a lot of the time brands will see working on content collaborations as like a us versus them kind of thing, you know, like it almost like it's almost like they deal with the content integration side the same way that they deal with the negotiating over budget side. They'll be like, we're here, they're here, and like, you know, we need to like, you know, go as hard as we can for this. And I think that's wrong. I think that brands should a lot more, obviously, like there are things that need to get done, and you can't just be like, hey creator, here's $100,000, just go have some fun and we'll trust you, you know, like there has to be back and forth there. But I think too often brands will try and leverage what they know from working in TV and, you know, traditional advertising, and they'll just really go hardline on that in the creator space. And I just think that it's so frustrating for me when I'm like, I know how I could do this so well and result in way better outcome for your brand. Please let me do it. And they're just like, no, talking points. And you're like, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's I think creators just also, it sort of weaves in with the points you were just mentioning about wanting to do stuff on their own terms, egos, that sort of thing. And I've had creators like film an integration and the company will be so difficult about wanting revisions and added talking points and all this sort of thing. Like the creator will pull out of like a 6-figure brand deal after they've filmed it, just because they're like, no, I hate this. Like, I hate it. I'm not going to do it. And it's just like, gosh, what a wasted opportunity. Yeah. For everyone involved. Yeah.
I mean, if you're giving revisions, it has to say, my goal is always to say, if you do this or you add this one thing, then we're good to go. You can't have, we have this things and then send me another round and these things. It has to be one comprehensive thing. If you're going to make any edits, and then it has to end with, then we're good to go. Because otherwise, people will revise things until they're blue in the face.
Yeah, I think that's what triggers me. If they're like, oh, can we just make this change? And I'm like, okay, there you go. And they're like, oh, actually, also this one. I've had a brand do that to me, like over 4 revisions. They were like, asked to change. I made it, sent it back. They're like, oh, actually now also our senior manager wants this thing changed. I'm like, okay, there we go, done. Come back. They're like, oh, you know, the execs just come back saying he wanted this one other little talking point. And they're like, okay, there we go. And they're like, oh, we just need one more. And then I think we're fine. And I'm just like, just what are you doing? Just correlate.
I think that was years ago, but I think if any creators are listening and you don't have management, make sure in your contract you have limited amounts of revisions in there, or that you have that they have to, if you can only revise if you haven't met the brief or something. Yeah. I reckon your background in talent management would help you hugely in your ability to work with creators now, though. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always I always put myself in their shoes. So whatever deal we're doing, whatever edits we're making, you really have to figure out how hard you're willing to push. What value are you really getting at a certain point? You have to make sure, do I really need this done? Is it worth pushing a creator to do a round of revisions when they're trying to get the video out the next day?
Yeah.
Or are we just, I always say, like, are we just trying to get cute and like make this thing perfect that doesn't need to be perfect? And so I always, having that talent background, I think lets you know, I just have so much respect for the people who do it that I never feel, I'm in a bad way explaining this, but I just never feel, I always am trying to cater to them, but not like, what are the 2 things we actually need done and what do we not care about? And I think that's usually when you're a manager, you say, and you get, let's say you got like 15 revisions, you say, okay, what are the 2 you actually care about? Because we're not doing 15.
Yeah.
And so I try to
100%.
jump that question and say, all right, what are the 2 changes we actually need? Let's not send 15 over, because then the creator is just going to throw up his hands and say, I'm not doing all this shit. I don't want to do this deal. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that more people take after your approach soon, because I think you've got a great way of doing it, and it's definitely a few years ahead of perhaps where a lot of the industry's at. So, thank you so much for coming on Watchtime, Ian. We really appreciate it, and I think your insight was amazing, and the audience will love it. So, to all of you at home, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Watchtime. We will see you next week.